Today, I'm very grateful to have Dr. Kana Grace as our grant speaker. For those who are not very familiar with GRAND, GRAND stands for Group for Research in Relationships and Neurodiversity. We're based at the Department of Clinical, Educational and Health Psychology at UCL's Faculty of Brain Sciences. We are a diverse network of researchers, activists, advocates, clinicians, and charity leaders. And our aim is to work closely with communities to better understand the well-being of neurodivergent people and also people with other syndromes across the life course. We have different research projects at the moment running, with the most recent one being a project where we want to understand the lived experiences of depression and interpersonal therapy in autistic adults. We're recruiting actively autistic adults and also therapists to better understand the lived experiences of depression in autistic people. So if you want to find out more, feel free to drop us an email or check our grant social media. So today, I'm very delighted to have Dr. Kana Grace as a speaker. Kana is a UCL Honorary Research Fellow. She is an advocate and researcher on health and well-being among neurodivergent people. She's very committed, passionate about research that is co-produced with rather than for neurodivergent people. Kana completed her PhD at UCL, and her doctoral research focused on loneliness and specifically the different types of measurements and lived experiences. And today she will give a very important talk on loneliness in autistic adults, what we know so far, what we know from the literature, from research, and also what we can do about it. A few housekeeping stuff before I hand over to Kana. Feel free, you're more than welcome to type any questions throughout Kana's talk. You can use the Q&A function that you will find at the bottom of your screen. You can post your questions anonymously or using a name, and you can also type any questions using the chat. And after Kana's talk, we'll have some time to go through some of these questions. So, Kana, again, thank you so much for being a speaker in these GRAND webinars this year. And yeah, over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Kana Grace, and a researcher and advocate specializing in neurodivergence. Today, I'm excited to discuss my PhD research, which focused on loneliness among autistic adults and examining both measurement tools and lived experiences. By the end of this presentation, I hope you gain a deeper understanding of the experiences of loneliness faced by autistic adults and discover ways you can offer them meaningful support. And before we dive into my doctoral research, allow me to introduce myself briefly. Currently based in Okinawa, Japan, I serve as an honorary postdoctoral research fellow at University College London, UCL in the UK, where I completed my PhD. And my work collaborates with research teams internationally, focusing on the health and well-being of neurodivergent people. I'm involved with several research teams and organizations in the UK, serving in roles such as advisor and committee member for neurodivergence-related charities and advocacy groups. In addition, I founded a neurodivergence advocacy organization called Valtameri, which is Finnish for ocean. Through Valtameri, I offer mental specialist mentoring, providing tailored support for neurodivergent people. And I conduct public talks that blend lived experiences with scientific insights to enhance societal understanding of neurodivergence. It's important to note that roles and work I've described here only scratch the surface of who I am, and I've shared more about my personal journey as a multiple neurodivergent individual in my recent keynote. So if you're interested, I'll share the link to my link tree at the end of my talk, where you can find more information. So here's the outline of my presentation today. I'll begin this talk by sharing some insights into my motivation and the background behind this research. And next, I'll introduce the studies conducted as part of my research and discuss how they contribute to our understanding of autistic experiences of loneliness. And finally, I'll explore the implications of this research for both practice and further studies. Okay, so I'm multiply neurodivergent, with being autistic being one of identities. And this PhD research was inspired by my personal experiences of feeling different in a world that values conformity. And I'm convinced that academic research holds immense potential to amplify voices that frequently go unnoticed. Presenting my inaugural independent study on the unique chemistry between autistic individuals and horses at Harvard University was a reaffirmation of this belief. And through my personal experiences and observations, I have witnessed the profound connections between horses and autistic people. And academic research has granted these observations the seriousness they deserve. And my PhD research aims to illuminate the often overlooked and disregarded experiences of loneliness among autistic adults. The reason I chose to study loneliness is that I believe connections of some form are vital to everyone, hence we are called social beings. And by exploring loneliness, which is essentially the absence of connection, I thought we could gain valuable insights into the experiences of autistic individuals. And autistic people often viewed as a minority and experiencing the world differently from the majority, neural majority, are nonetheless social beings like anyone else. Thus, my research began by questioning what it means to be autistic and to desire connections. And many of you here may be already familiar with autism, but let me summarize some key aspects of autism in relation to loneliness. Firstly, it's important to share my perspective on autism to set the context. So I view autism and other neurodivergencies as minority brain characteristics. Thus, I refer to the majority as the neural majority. Because neurodivergencies are minorities, and minoritized groups in society are almost always viewed negatively, many neurodivergent people also tend to experience stigma. And while autism has long been considered a disorder or impairment that needs to be fixed, quote unquote fixed, I believe it's misguided to aim to fix autism, or it's actually inhumane. Autistic people bring unique contributions to the world that would not be possible without them. I have elaborated on my views on neurodivergence in the keynote, so you can watch that through my link tree. And despite the common statement that you don't look autistic, there are no physical indicators that someone is autistic. Autism is often referred to as hidden disability, and this invisible nature of autism makes it difficult for autistic people to be understood and accepted by others. And there is a prevalent myth that autistic people do not desire social connections. While some of us may want limited social interactions, it does not mean we desire no connection whatsoever. For some, meeting other people once every month is enough social interaction. For others, engaging with their partner, family member, or pets is sufficient for their social needs. And the degrees and forms of social interactions preferred by autistic individuals can vary and can be more limited compared to non-autistic people. However, does this mean autistic people do not want social connections? Absolutely not. This myth likely originated from early descriptions of autism, such as those by Leo Kanner, who first identified autism and described one of his patients as happiest when alone, noting autistic people's powerful desire for aloneness. Furthermore, in 2012, a social motivation theory was proposed suggesting that autistic people have low motivation for social interaction early in life, leading to minimal social engagements throughout their lifetime. Despite these historical views, both research and first-hand accounts from autistic individuals demonstrate that not only do they experience loneliness, but they may also be particularly vulnerable to it. So, what is loneliness? Loneliness is often defined as a painful and subjective emotional state that arises from discrepancies between desired and actual social relationships. It's important to note that loneliness is distinct from objective social isolation, which can be quantified through indicators like less frequent social interactions or having fewer friends. And loneliness is also different from solitude or aloneness, as the latter is chosen while loneliness is not. And loneliness negatively impacts both mental and physical health. Existing evidence shows that consequences of loneliness include depression, Alzheimer's disease, and dementia, elevated blood pressure, cortisol levels, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and even early mortality. And various hypotheses have been proposed regarding the mechanisms through which loneliness develops and how it might become chronic in the general population. However, these hypotheses have not yet been thoroughly tested, and much remains unknown about the mechanisms of loneliness. So autistic people are a social minority and are vulnerable to the stigma and discrimination associated with loneliness. And as mentioned earlier, loneliness negatively impacts mental and physical health. However, loneliness in autistic adults remains under-researched. When I began my PhD in 2018, there was limited evidence on how autistic adults experience loneliness and how they might overcome it. Through my PhD research, I aim to help non-autistic people understand the experiences of loneliness in this population, and to provide autistic adults with a language needed to articulate their lived experiences of loneliness. As an autistic person myself, I understood what it felt like to be lonely, but often struggled to express it effectively. Having the words to describe one's experiences can be empowering. My PhD research comprised 4 distinct studies: a systematic review, a study examining measures to assess loneliness, a study exploring the lived experiences of loneliness, and a study investigating these experiences before and during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. Next, I'll dive into each study in more detail. First, I conducted a systematic review to comprehensively synthesize existing evidence on loneliness in autistic adults. This was the first systematic review specifically targeting loneliness in this population. Initially, 1,460 studies were identified, and ultimately 34 studies met the inclusion criteria and were analyzed. These studies were published in English between 2007 and 2021. The review has been published in the journal Autism, and the full text is accessible online. One of the prominent findings from this review was that very few empirical studies have employed reliable and valid measure of loneliness developed specifically for autistic adults. This gap in the research was something I aim to address in a subsequent study. Additionally, the review highlighted a significant lack of research exploring the lived experiences of loneliness among autistic adults, which I also sought to address in later studies. These findings underscored the need for more targeted research to better understand and measure loneliness in this population. The systematic review revealed that few studies have utilized valid and reliable measures of loneliness specifically developed for autistic adults, and relying on existing measures not validated for this group could be problematic, as they may not accurately reflect the unique experiences of autistic people. So following the systematic review, I conducted a mixed method online survey study, the results of which were published last Christmas and are accessible online. The aim of this study was to examine whether and how accurately existing loneliness measures captured the experiences of loneliness in autistic adults. It also explored autistic adults' views and experiences regarding two widely used loneliness measures. An additional goal was to determine whether these measures need to be adopted specifically for autistic adults, and if so, how such adaptations should be implemented. In this study, 203 autistic adults participated. The online survey was designed by me, an autistic researcher, and it was refined with feedback from 6 autistic adults on the final draft. Back then, I had limited knowledge about co-designing and co-producing research. If I were to conduct this research again, I would design and execute it alongside autistic people. It was only during the middle of my PhD that I began to understand co-production, as I engaged in various co-produced research projects as an expert by experiences. And the survey included, so this study, in this study, the survey included existing loneliness questionnaires along with open text questions that allowed participants to comment on each measure. The key findings from this study were twofold. One, the widely used measures of loneliness correlated with a direct measure of loneliness, indicating that they seem to accurately reflect the levels of loneliness experienced by autistic adults. And 2, autistic adults reported several difficulties in completing these measures. The primary concerns regarding the loneliness questionnaires were that the measures did not account for autistic experiences, but were instead based on non-autistic norms, and that the items on the measures were not clearly worded. These findings suggested that certain amendments to the questionnaire, such as clarifying the wording, could make them more accessible for autistic individuals. In my thesis, I proposed specific amendments based on these findings. Following these evidence-based suggestions, I have been collaborating with an international team of researchers led by Autism Spectrum Australia Aspect, Australia's largest autism charity, to adapt and evaluate a loneliness measurement specifically for autistic adults. Now, I'm introducing my third study, which explores the lived experiences of loneliness among autistic adults. As noted earlier, my systematic review highlighted a significant gap in the research concerning the lived experiences of loneliness in autistic adults. Thus, this study aimed to delve into the unique aspects of loneliness experienced by them. More specifically, I investigated what loneliness feels like for autistic adults, how they manage loneliness, what alleviates their loneliness, and how their experiences of loneliness may change over time. This study utilized a portion of data collected from the online surveys in my second study. Consequently, 203 autistic adults participated in this study. The data were analyzed using reflexive semantic analysis to identify patterns in the participants' responses. The findings revealed that autistic adults indeed desire social relationships, but face multiple barriers to establishing them. These barriers include intolerable sensory environments, a lack of societal understanding and acceptance of autism, and difficulties finding common ground in terms of understanding and experiences. Despite these challenges, autistic adults value meaningful relationships that provide emotional connectedness and access to confidence when needed. And the participants reported that they managed to forge such relationships by connecting with others who share similar experiences, spending time with pets and animals, and relying on a single close person. A significant internal conflict was evident among autistic adults. The desire to connect with others while finding it difficult, finding it challenging, and simultaneously needing time and space for themselves. This internal conflict between the desire for and the barriers to connection emerged as a crucial theme in this study. Moreover, autistic adults indicated that overcoming their internal conflict and loneliness was possible through self-understanding and acceptance. For some, loneliness was accepted as part of their autistic experience. Based on the findings from this research, I developed paradoxical loneliness loop model to explain loneliness in autistic adults. This model illustrates how autistic adults desire social relationships, but encounter multiple barriers in forming them. These barriers can lead to exhaustion, and this exhaustion from social interactions itself becomes a further barrier. And due to the draining nature of social interaction, autistic adults may need to take a step back from socializing, which in turn perpetuates their loneliness. While future research is needed to evaluate this model, I hope it will help many better understand the complexities of loneliness in autistic adults. I'm currently preparing this study for publication, but the complete text is already available in my thesis, which is openly accessible. Now I'm introducing my final study. As I was planning this study, the COVID-19 pandemic emerged, drastically altering social dynamics worldwide through measures such as physical distancing. This unprecedented situation prompted me to explore how it impacted the experiences of loneliness among autistic adults. This study was the first mixed methods research to address this topic, providing insights into the lived experiences during the pandemic. It had two aims. One, to determine if and how the experiences of loneliness for autistic adults changed before and during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic in the UK. And two, to understand how autistic adults managed and wanted to manage their loneliness during these early stages. A subset of participants from my previous survey participated in this follow-up study. They took part in the survey in May 2020 during the initial lockdown in the UK. Participants completed the same loneliness scales used in the first survey and responded to a series of questions about their experiences and management strategies for loneliness during the lockdown. And one of the key findings from this study was the variability in autistic adults' experiences of loneliness during the early stages of the pandemic. On a group level, the overall loneliness scores for autistic adults were lower during the early stage of the pandemic compared to before the restrictions were imposed. However, when examining the data on individual level, the decrease in loneliness appeared to be driven by a relatively small number of participants. In this figure, each dot represents an individual participant's score, and the scores between the dotted line indicate unreliable changes, while the scores below the horizontal line represent clinically significant changes. As you can see, the decrease in loneliness when considered on an individual level was influenced by a small number of participants indicated by the red dots here. This highlights the importance of considering individual differences in the experiences of autistic people. And moreover, when directly asked about changes in their levels of loneliness, many autistic adults actually reported an increase in their levels of loneliness during the lockdown. and this variability was further corroborated by the qualitative data collected on their lived experiences. And another key finding was that autistic adults most commonly relied on social interaction to alleviate their feelings of loneliness. However, many expressed uncertainty about what could be helpful in managing their loneliness when they felt lonely. Additionally, it's worth noting that autistic adults appreciated certain aspects of social distancing and government directives, such as the option to work from home. This preference aligns with findings from other studies. Maintaining remote options is crucial to create inclusive social environments for autistic individuals, and I personally resonate with this perspective. I find that I work most effectively at home, accompanied only by my 2 dogs, and I value any opportunities that allow me to engage in activities without leaving the comfort of my home. I've discussed these experiences more extensively in my recent keynote, and I hope you'll have a chance to watch it. And although I'm not planning to publish this particular study, for more details on this research, please refer to chapter 5 of my thesis. Hey, so now that I've introduced all of my studies in my PhD, I'll summarize the key findings in a Q&A style. So first, do autistic adults experience loneliness, and how does it relate to social interactions? My paradoxical loneliness loop model, which I introduced earlier, helps to answer this question. It's important to emphasize again that autistic adults do seek some forms of social interactions, social connections, and do experience loneliness under certain circumstances and contexts. But socializing can be exhausting for autistic people. Therefore, it's crucial to find a balance or rhythm between engaging in social interactions and having time alone. This process is greatly aided by support from various figures such as teachers, parents, mentors, or mental health professionals. So how can we determine how lonely autistic adults are? Throughout my research, it has become clear that loneliness in autistic adults is a complex emotion that cannot be fully captured by standardized measures alone, particularly when these measures are not developed for or validated in autistic populations. As I discussed earlier in my study 2, the measurement study, the commonly used loneliness measures appear to accurately report autistic adults' subjective levels of loneliness. However, they might not fully capture the underlying experiences of loneliness in autistic adults. Therefore, relying solely on standardized measures of loneliness may lead to underestimating or overestimating loneliness in autistic adults. Thus, understanding the lived experiences of loneliness is crucial to complement and explain scores on standardized measures. Additionally, both my study 2, the measurement study, and study 4, the COVID study, demonstrated that experiences of loneliness among autistic people are highly variable. Therefore, it's essential to consider individual differences when assessing the experiences of loneliness among autistic adults. So, what, if anything, is unique about autistic adults' experiences of loneliness? Firstly, the core of autistic adults' experiences of loneliness often revolves around internal conflict or dilemma between their desire for connections versus the difficulties they face in achieving these connections, leading to feelings of loneliness. And autistic adults frequently encounter multiple challenges in social settings that are tailored to non-autistic norms, resulting in an exhaustion from social interactions. Consequently, due to these challenges and/or the need to recover from exhaustion, autistic adults might sometimes choose to avoid social interactions. Ironically, this avoidance can lead to loneliness despite their inherent desire for connection. Secondly, my research has shown that autistic adults experience meaningful connection, meaningful relationships with significant others, such as parents, partners, or pets, and with peers who share similar experiences, such as other autistic individuals or people with similar hobbies. And while such relationships are valuable for everyone, they might be particularly significant for autistic adults due to their specific social and emotional needs. Thirdly, a distinct aspect of loneliness among autistic adults is often underpinned by a lack of societal understanding and acceptance of autism, along with a shortage of shared experiences. This lack of acceptance can lead autistic adults to engage in camouflaging behavior to fit in, which is associated with increased loneliness. So what can be done to alleviate loneliness among autistic adults? The solutions involve actions both by autistic individuals and by society at large. Firstly, my research suggests that it is crucial for autistic adults to learn to accept their autistic differences to help alleviate loneliness, and this acceptance can be fostered by connecting with significant others and or peers with similar experiences. And these connections may be maintained with a single individual, such as a parent, partner, pet animals, or online communities, as identified in my studies. For instance, in my COVID study, autistic adults who lived with significant others during the early stage of the pandemic experienced reduced loneliness due to increased quality time spent together. And secondly, society needs to make adaptations and adjustments to be more accommodating towards autistic adults. One way to support autistic adults in alleviating loneliness is to remove sensory barriers in social environments, as sensory challenges can inhibit social interactions for many autistic individuals. The pandemic demonstrated that accommodations such as providing online options for healthcare, education, or conferences can significantly benefit autistic adults by catering to the unique social needs. And furthermore, fostering a better societal understanding and acceptance of autism, as well as cultivating shared experiences between autistic and non-autistic people, are essential steps towards reducing loneliness. While some autistic adults may come to terms with their feelings of loneliness over time, accepting loneliness should be considered a last resort. The barriers to social interaction for autistic adults are often external, such as sensory environments and a societal lack of understanding and acceptance of autism. Therefore, reducing these barriers requires the active cooperation of non-autistic people, since autistic individuals can do little on their own to remove these barriers, except for choosing socially suitable environments. Some might end up accepting their feelings of loneliness and become comfortable with that feelings over time. However, it's important to recognize a fine line between contentment with solitude and actual loneliness. Loneliness is context dependent, and a situation where one feels comfortable being alone at one time might lead to feelings of loneliness in another context or at a different time in life. Now I'll discuss future directions. Practicality has always been a core value in my research. In autism research, the aim should not only be to enhance knowledge, but also to effect positive changes that make the world a better place for autistic people. My PhD research laid the groundwork for studying loneliness in autistic adults, and it's crucial to think about what further actions can be taken to help autistic adults feel less lonely and to ensure those who seek connections experience a sense of connectedness. During my research, participants highlighted a gap between autism research and practical application. In my qualitative study, I asked participants about their priorities to this loneliness research, for future loneliness research. And the responses to this question were not included in the analysis due to the unprecedented social circumstances associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. That's why this is not a full analysis. Autistic adults emphasized the importance of the practical application of the research. And I wholeheartedly agree with this sentiment and recognize the need for practical changes beyond research. For example, one participant noted that research should focus on helping us to be less lonely. Another added that research should explore how to meet social needs in an accessible way. Additionally, some participants expressed a sense of urgency in addressing loneliness more practically. What we need is action to remedy the situation. These sentiments are not unique to research on loneliness, but apply to autism research more broadly. Next, I'll share some evidence-based suggestions for future directions. Cultivating acceptance of autistic differences in autistic adults is crucial. My research indicates that autistic adults can alleviate feelings of loneliness by accepting their autistic differences. One such difference noted in my studies is that autistic adults may find meaningful relationships with just one person, such as a parent or partner, with pets or animals or online. Recognizing that one's social interactions may be limited is easier said than done. I know this from my personal experiences. And it's important to clarify that cultivating acceptance of autistic differences in autistic adults isn't about forcing them to accept these differences. Rather, it's beneficial to have support from someone like a counselor or mentor who can help them understand themselves through the lenses of autism. In my specialist mentoring support, for instance, when my mentees discuss experiences that are common among neurodivergent individuals, I affirm that these experiences are shared experiences among many autistic people or those with ADHD. And this validation can bring comfort and foster a deeper understanding of autism and other neurodivergencies and eventually themselves. Thus, this approach promotes self-compassion, which can be instrumental in helping autistic adults accept their autistic differences and mitigate feelings of loneliness. Another way to translate the evidence from my PhD research into practice is through social prescribing. My research has demonstrated that connecting with similar others can help alleviate loneliness in autistic adults. Therefore, encouraging autistic adults to seek and access opportunities to connect with similar others, should they wish to do so, is recommended. A potential avenue for facilitating these connections is social prescribing. Social prescribing, also known as community referral, involves primary healthcare professionals referring their patients to non-medical services within the community. It has been gaining attention in the UK in recent years and can include a range of activities like art, exercise, gardening, cooking, practical support such as housing advice. And currently there is limited evidence on the effectiveness of social prescribing for the general population and autistic individuals specifically. For autistic adults, social prescribing can facilitate involvement in groups centered around shared autistic identity. For example, I established the first ever autistic peer group at UCL in 2019, which is now a part of UCL Autism Society. This group has provided a safe space for autistic students to meet similar others. And groups can also be based around shared interests. Personally, I have been involved in classical ballet since the age of 3, and it has been one of the few places where I can truly be myself and interact with others without anxiety. Incorporating these types of social opportunities into social prescribing could significantly enhance the well-being of neurodivergent adults, autistic adults, by providing them with meaningful social connections tailored to their preferences and needs. And implementing accommodations in social settings is practical application of my research findings. My research has highlighted that sensory environments can be significant barriers for autistic adults in engaging in social interactions, and this adds to the existing evidence that sensory avoidance is linked to increased levels of loneliness among autistic adults. One effective way to remove sensory barriers is to integrate online interactions into various social settings, such as the workplace. After all, we all perform best when we feel safe and comfortable. And if working from home facilitates this, why not embrace it? My study 4, the COVID study, noted that cultural shifts during the early stages of the pandemic, like remote work, were beneficial for autistic adults. This aligns with other reports about autistic people's experiences during the pandemic. When, that's my dog moving. Okay, so when in-person social interactions are necessary, accommodating sensory preferences can be more complex due to the diversity and complexity of individual needs among autistic adults. However, it's crucial to continuously learn from each autistic individual and from examples of autistic-led events to understand how environments can be made more sensory friendly for autistic people. Simple adjustments such as dimming lights or allowing hand flapping instead of clapping at events can make a significant difference. It's often the small changes that can make a big impact. To alleviate loneliness and enhance social inclusion for autistic adults, society should strive to create universally inclusive social environments that benefit everyone, while also considering reasonable adjustments specifically for autistic individuals where applicable. Translating my research findings into practical resources such as training modules and information packets for mental health professionals can significantly enhance their understanding of loneliness in autistic adults. My research has revealed that a lack of shared understandings and experiences often underpins the loneliness experienced by autistic adults. This suggests that providing autistic people with the correct information on autistic adults' experiences of loneliness could be beneficial in bridging the gap between autistic and non-autistic people's understanding and experiences of the social world. Therefore, equipping non-autistic individuals, especially mental health professionals, with a better grasp of autistic adults' experiences of loneliness could be instrumental. Research indicates that many mental health professionals have limited knowledge about autism. If you are a mental health professional, this isn't necessarily about you personally, it's a general observation. My passion for this topic actually stems from my own journey. I initially pursued a master's in mental health counseling to help individuals like myself, and it was through this experience that I realized many of those individuals are neurodivergent, and prompting me to delve deeper into autism and neurodivergence research. A lack of knowledge about autism among mental health professionals can lead to autistic individuals feeling misunderstood and having negative experiences within mental health services. Given the prevalence of autism, it is almost certain that mental health professionals will encounter autistic clients in their practice. So it's crucial to provide these professionals with adequate resources to understand the specific challenges such as loneliness faced by autistic adults. And absolutely, it's not just mental health professionals who need to learn about autistic people's experiences. A broader societal understanding is also essential. My research highlights how a lack of societal understanding and acceptance of autism significantly underpins the loneliness experienced by autistic adults. Addressing this issue is challenging due to deeply entrenched misconceptions about autism and a general societal reluctance to accepting differences, which is not unique to neurodivergence. Yet, improving societal understanding and acceptance of autism is crucial, as misconceptions are not only linked to increased loneliness, but also contribute to numerous barriers faced by autistic people, including bullying, unemployment, or underemployment, and negative healthcare experiences. Enhanced social understanding and acceptance can be facilitated through well-designed training programs. Some studies have shown that trainings aimed at increasing knowledge about autism and decreasing misconceptions among non-autistic adults can lead to more acceptance of autistic children and adults. Effective autism trainings often share two key characteristics. They are specifically designed for the target audience, and they incorporate inputs from autistic individuals. By adhering to these principles, training programs can significantly improve societal attitudes and acceptance towards autistic individuals, thereby helping to alleviate loneliness among autistic adults. Following this approach, I have been actively involved in delivering public talks on autism and neurodivergence more generally, including regular in-person public lectures in my local area. These efforts are aimed at fostering a better understanding and reducing stigma associated with neurodivergence, ultimately contributing to a more inclusive society. Thank you, and here is my contact information. You can find links to the papers, thesis I discussed today, as well as my recent public talk on my Linktree. And I'm now happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Kana, thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. It is so interesting to see how these loneliness measures do not capture the full spectrum of experiences, of lived experiences of autistic people, and how important it is to work closely with autistic communities to seek their perspectives, to challenge that neuronormative narrative of how autistic people connect, and also how you highlighted the importance of focusing on the implementation side of things, on how we can use these findings to inform current policy and practice. We've got some questions in the chat. So first of all, there's a person saying that how they really enjoyed the presentations. And on the face of it,
Irina said she can't hear you. Irina can't hear you. I can hear you. Could that be for everyone or?
Can people hear me?
Okay.
What about now?
Someone else said they can hear you.
Good. Sorry about that. It's too loud now. Hopefully it's better now. Yeah, so just want to say that we've got some questions in the chat. People really enjoyed your presentations, Kana. And there is one person asking, it seems like social prescribing is singularly the most effective way to challenge loneliness in autistic adults. Is this something that you agree with? Do you have other thoughts?
I feel that there isn't any singular way that is effective to autistic adults because there are various experiences among autistic adults and no one autistic person is the same, as you already know probably. But so social prescribing can be a powerful tool, but for some people who don't really like more social interactions, it can be a torture. It can be like, oh, I don't want any more socializing, any more peopling. So in that case, maybe talking with mentor or counselor and trying to accept your own limit regarding social, your sociality, that is also important. That is very difficult, but important, I think.
Thank you so much, Kana. There is another comment in the chat which says that the paradoxical loop is so simple, but so perfectly summarizes my experience of wanting connection, but finding it overwhelming. And I really see how this can be a helpful model to share with counseling clients to validate the conflict they so often describe.
Oh, thank you so much for the comment. That's very encouraging that model resonates to you. That resonates with myself too, and resonated with a lot of autistic individuals around me as well. And I think we already knew that before I did my research. I guess if you're autistic, the information I talked about today isn't anything surprising. That wasn't surprising to me. So the paradoxical model, the core of it is the dilemma, the internal conflict between the desire to connect and not being able to do so because of the barriers. So that like just giving words to it just is empowering, I think.
Thank you, Kana. And we've got another question in the chat. This time is about what schools can do with children and young people. So how do you think SEN schools, special education needs schools, with their set social expectations, can better adapt and adopt the knowledge and findings of your research?
So I think the important things to remember is that socializing is quite tiring for autistic people. So forcing any autistic children or adults to be more social isn't the answer to loneliness. It could be actually doing the opposite, making them lonely in a crowd where people don't understand them. I think that has happened to a lot of you. If you're autistic, that happens to a lot of autistic people generally. So it's important to remember for any practitioners working with autistic children or adults that socializing is extremely tiring to the degrees that is different for non-autistic people. Non-autistic people might feel tired at some point in social interactions naturally, but for autistic people, it is really, really tiring.